Hi everybody, welcome to Archimarathon. In an age of global warming and rising sea levels and trauma and war and famine and a virus that's locking us all away at home, could a single house solve all of those global problems?
I don't think it can.
It definitely can, and this house, Garden House by Austin Maynard Architects, has solved them all. Roll intro.
Hang on.
Roll intro.
What am I doing here then?
Roll intro.
We're talking about the garden
Roll
house.
intro. We're talking about
Right.
the Garden House.
No,
No.
it's off. It's off. No,
It's
out.
fine.
No.
Come on. I will admit, maybe Austin Maynard aren't the best in the world, best in Australia, and maybe this hasn't solved all those problems. All right, so there's some really strong underlying principles in this design that are in a lot of Austin Maynard Architects' works. But before we get there, I just want to hit all the bling that this house is being constructed with. Like this is, we do really sustainable homes. This one is off the charts. We're talking about a 17 kilowatt solar array, which is more than we put on multi-residential buildings. And there's a 26 kilowatt Tesla battery. There's 15,000 litres of water collected in the garage, which are used in the toilets and the gardens. There's no gas in this house at all. These big efficient heat pumps, all the bricks that you can see are all recycled. The concrete itself is 50% fly ash. All of the glazing, thermally separated frame, double glazing. There's even film on the outside that's reflective. Every single window is solar protected. And it's a fully automated house. So if it starts getting hot, it goes, ha-ha. There's a full ERV system in the house, so energy recovery system. And all of the walls are really thick. We've double studded, so you get extra insulation that goes through it, so you get complete thermal separation, so it's super sustainable.
Okay, I get it. All right. Yeah.
Sustainable.
It's a plane.
It's a plane.
Yes, welcome to Love Island.
So Andrew, as per our sustainability episode, none of that stuff really makes architecture. We all should be doing this as a society, as almost government sanctioned push for everyone to be doing that. But we talk about design fundamentals. We talk about what makes places great and spaces. So you, as an architect for this project, and your team, what have you guys done to make this special as a worthy architecture?
Absolutely. So this has got sort of some of our greatest hits in it. What we should start with though is the understanding of the site, because it's really interesting. This is a single fronted terrace house, as are all of its neighbours, but this particular block seems to have somehow gathered everybody else's backyards. So it's a single fronted terrace that comes through and then blows out into this big garden. So when we first were approached by this client, this garden was here. So first and foremost on our mind was, how do we protect the garden? Not how do we design a floor plan that's just about orientation, but actually going, hang on, there's already stuff here. They are trees, they are shrubs, and they're beautiful. How do we weave a house through that and make it sustainable? So it was actually pretty hard. Because what you want to do is you want to sit it on the southern boundary, just like we did with the Rae Street house, and you want to face it north. And that's what we've done. That's south, that's north. But there's a lot of trees on the south because there's an apartment block behind us. So the previous owners have put up those trees to try and hide from that. So we've had to wind the building through it and stacking all of those service areas that we've talked about before. So the bathroom and the pantries and the laundries all to the south, so you can face towards the north. But we've got to do that without stuffing up the garden, which is really, really hard.
There's a strategy that you guys tend to do a lot, is actually break the building mass down into multiple forms. In this case, you've got almost 4 houses or 4 pavilions. I mean, there's some monstrosities. When I was driving down the street, there were some monstrosities here in this part of Melbourne, and single massive block. you've broken down, it is quite a large house, but you've broken it down into many different pavilions, compartments, buildings, whatever you like to call it. Again, it's like a collection of buildings amongst this garden.
Because as you said, gentrification is happening throughout these suburbs. And the first tactic that usually is applied is you scrape clean the site. So you just bring the bulldozers in, you knock everything over and you get rid of the garden, and then you put the house in there, and that just becomes sort of house-centric, where we really chose to say, what are we custodians of? What is here? And so even though we've done it before, this idea of an accretion of smaller pavilions, here the trees meant we had to. Because one of the first things we did before we designed anything was did a full study on the trees. Got an arborist out to actually look at the health of each tree, whether it will survive the building process, what its structural root zone is, because that meant that we had to design footings before we designed the goddamn house. We had to work out where like the corridor is that actually has to be like a bridge over the top of a structural root zone that we had to miss. That led to this idea of that reinforced the idea of lots of little pavilions.
And I think in some ways also there's a sort of journey between them, but also the way the various spaces between them are seen and viewed from different angles as you move through the building. It kind of reminds me of Chinese gardens. And Chinese gardens, for those who don't know, are usually full of buildings. You can't have a Chinese garden that just, a garden. It has to have buildings, in fact, quite a lot of buildings. And it's always this relationship between the buildings and the various little gardens. Rather than one single garden, it's a series of gardens. So together, they makes a garden with the house. So in this case, I think garden house, it's a way of thinking about it. Instead of the house and then there's a garden, is houses or buildings amongst gardens as one garden.
The fact that a garden doesn't have to be very big. You can manipulate space through really interesting spatial moves through the use of pavilions. And so the idea that you will enter a garden and there'll be a moon opening that looks at a particular place and over a pond and you're like, I want to be there, and it's not that far away, but you actually get steered away from that and you then look at it from different vantage points. Much more sophisticated than the European tradition, which is just get a big bit of green space, plonk a house in it, and you're either looking from the house or back to the house.
I think that comes from the picturesque, this idea that it's framing the landscape, and the landscape's something over there, and you have the control over it, and there's foreground, background, which is very sort of European, 18th century dated idea, as opposed to you're amongst the gardens.
Yep.
And it's enjoying and interacting with the gardens as you move along, and also the sound and sight and smells as you move through, and how different spaces have different qualities and different themes rather than a single expression of a single space. Right, should we go and have a look?
Nah.
Fine, see ya.
End of video. All right, so instead of the front door being right at the front of the street, there's this simplistic way of just coming the front door. Again, it's similar to a Chinese garden. You actually have to travel a bit of a distance past a lot of the house. So the garage and the bike store and the workshop, the rumpus room and the study, to come down to the front door. And then when you enter, you don't actually enter straight into the house. So it's layering from the street. You actually get to see straight out into the backyard again, so you orientate towards the garden. And, it's a young family as well, so somewhere to sit down, take your shoes off, put your umbrella away, your coats, hang up some stuff. The urgent whiz, because one of the kids is like, I need to go to the toilet. You straight away, you come in the front door and you do that. So the pragmatics are dealt with. Then you can come into the house and chill.
I like the use of the mirror as well. It really gives it a sense of that, almost as if there's a hole there.
There's lots of mirror in this project as well, for exactly that reason, to try to reflect natural light in garden, so where there's dead ends, it looks like it keeps going.
And I noticed that happen in the garden as well too. That's there's a sense of illusion of depth of space or openness to things when there isn't. Yeah,
because even though we have those separate pavilions, it is actually a continuous building. So making it mirrored glass means that it seems like there's more garden when there's not.
And also there's always just sort of intrigue of something else around the corner as well, which is quite important. So now we turn into the living room,
where you're orientated to another garden as well. So at the end of each corridor, we try to get natural light and garden. And so this is actually the backyard of some of the terrace houses that are out the front. So this is where they've ended up with their backyards as part of their property. Loading up the southern boundary with all of the junk. So the laundry, the pantry, the bathrooms upstairs are all pushed towards the south, towards the apartment building. That means the living spaces are all open towards the sun and passive solar gain and garden. And in here, we end up with a hydronically heated concrete floor, where at the entry we actually have the brickwork. So it's like that's this ruinous old part of brick, so it's almost still part of the outside. And then in here it becomes much more domestic. And then through to the dining space. Kev, you talked about open plan. You know, you get the choice here, where you can actually go, we'll leave all of the junk behind, all the mess can stay in the kitchen, we'll just rock on here in the dining room. You can't come though, Kev. It's not for you.
Oh.
You're not invited. So this, from the outside, is that mirrored bit of glass. So again, you get the reflection of garden. So we're actually coming into the next pavilion. And here's where the dining room connects to the barbecue and back out into the garden. And this is similar to the 6 degrees idea that we were talking about before, somewhere where you can just sort of sit down, you can grab a beer and just have a bit of a conversation, but there's layering through. Somebody can be preparing something, somebody can be in the lounge room, on the dining table, or chilling out here.
And that's another garden there, right?
Another sneaky little garden. And that one is, again, the gap between pavilions. So another mirrored glass corridor at the back of that.
And there's the reflection. I can see myself there. So when I'm seated here at the dining table, even if I'm facing the wrong direction, I can see the garden behind.
Yeah. And so we've done that a lot in our houses, where the mirror ends up on the back boundary and you feel like the space keeps going, but it's actually like, that's the back of the house. That's somebody else's property over there. Then we come through, again, brick floor, so similar to transition space to the entry space, and that brick goes up to a landing, and you get a different orientation back down into the garden before you turn to go back up into the bedroom spaces. But then it actually becomes a timber floor, and that's because we've had to treat this as a bridge, because that tree, which is actually a protected tree, we had to protect its structural root zone. So we've hovered over its roots. So we go from masonry to timber. And you reorient back to the garden in both directions.
And it's like a bridge, yeah, you got gardens on both sides.
Yeah, and our neighbours. Hi everybody. Spare bedroom and the rumpus room for the kids. And again, connected back out into the garden, back out into the old tree.
From a different angle.
I'll meet you upstairs. Ow, it's not made for people my size. It's made for munchkins. I'm getting too old for this shit.
Well, I quite like that. You got the glimpse of garden here at the end of the corridor, really.
Kids'
rooms.
Yep. Now glass, especially really thermally efficient glass, with thermally broken frames is really expensive, so you can't spend too much. So something like a kid's bedroom, you've got to be careful you spend it. But then when you have a small window, it's like Corbusier used to say, you know, just create a little frame to something. I actually quite like that you get the old terrace houses and you turn that and you come in the door.
Well, in that case, you actually see through the space between the two buildings out on the other street and seeing more trees in the distance.
Yeah. And it's just a small window, but it does a lot of work. So you get your glass to do as much as possible. And then you get something like this, and we deliberately drop the sills because you're looking down at where the family is, because that's that sitting area with the little fire out there. Polycarbonate, because the apartments are there. So you still get the movement of the trees and the colour and the greenery, but you get privacy.
And also it gives the polycarbonate double wall, twin wall, multi-wall.
Thermoclick.
It gives a huge air gap and insulation
Yep.
as well. I noticed the detail of the glazing, the way that it really does feel like a bridge, first of all, but also the glazing sails past the ground there, and also in the ceiling, you can see it actually goes up.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on this stuff. Even details like this. Come over here. This is like my favourite bit. You know, so zoning, let's close these off so we only have to heat certain zones. And working with a problem rather than against it. So we had to deal with this structure. We just cut the door around it. I love it.
And oh, I just noticed this. There's even glass in there.
Yep.
There's glass in between the frame, so as if it just really continues down. It really does feel like bridging between elements.
Well, that was added later, just so kids being chaotic didn't transmit sound down. So I probably would have left the glass off. Because there's a door down there as well. In a longhouse, you can actually have its own microclimate where you'll get breezes through it. It'll be quite cooling. So you actually want to, chop them down into smaller zones. And especially with the energy recovery unit, that's moving the air anyway with no energy loss. Kids pavilion, across the bridge into this pavilion with the stair, and then upstairs, the sitting area for the parents. Again, another connection to the garden. They originally talked to us about putting a deck out there, and we were saying, well, why don't you just put a big door here? Because a deck actually stops you from looking down, especially in Melbourne, because most of the time you have the windows closed. So we put the balustrade on the inside, so when you throw it all away, it's like, hi everybody, you're not disconnected by a deck. And you didn't spend money on a deck. And then to the parents' master bedroom, robe bathroom at the back, end of the corridor, natural light, as always. And then they have this sneaky little roof garden. Hey Mike, do I have to go back down that way? Can I just use the stairs? I'm too old for this shit.
I'm too old for this shit.
I'm too old for this shit.
2 weeks till retirement.
But yeah, another one of my favourite things is this transition. It's a whole different view into the garden. I love dropping down there and then turning away. So you can see the mirrored glass there. So when you walk past it, you just see garden in your periphery. There's a little bit more framing in there than I really wanted, but because it's such efficient glazing and the frames are separated, it just means there's a bit more chunk there. So it's making it really sustainable, and the aesthetic suffers a little bit, but still it works. You get more garden. Then there's a big pelmet at the top that's got a whole roller blind in it. So when it's really hot, you can pull automatically a roller blind will come down and protect that glass from the northern sun. While all the other north-facing windows have an eave on it, which it cuts out all summer sun hitting the glass, but then the low winter sun can go right into the house.
And also the west as well, right?
Yes, yeah, so we protect from the north and the west, and the morning sun we just say it's okay, especially with this big tree here. We just thought we'll let the morning sun come in.
And it's great too because the white will bounce the light back into the space as well in the morning.
We've reset to a previous save of this video game. This time we're going to turn right. And we come into the rumpus room. Another very linear orientation back to the garden. And again, using polycarb inside as separation.
So where are we now?
So we're at the front of the house, which is essentially utilities, storage, bike storage, and we've got 26 kilowatts of Tesla battery here. So this thing makes sure that no energy is ever being pulled off the grid. Energy's only going one way and getting pushed into the grid. But if there's a whole heap of days where there's just cloud cover, that thing has stored up all the energy you need. And so bike storage. If you want to prioritise sustainable travel, then you've got to make sure that the bikes don't come in past cars, because you'll never get them back out again because it's too much of a hassle. You'll always take the easiest transport option. This has its own doorway, so you can go straight out right away without having the cars in the way.
And that was the passageway that we saw when we came in.
Yep. Yeah, do you want to have a look? Oh, press a button, grab a bike, you're out onto the street. That's how you have sustainable travel working. Remember this episode?
And that's, I assume, will be the tank that you keep going on about?
Yep, 15,000 litres of water underneath the cars.
There's even skylights here.
Well, okay, so whenever we design a garage, so I'm not really into cars. So I think if we're going to get a huge amount of space to dedicate to a machine, that space should be able to have a different life when the machine's not in it. So this has actually been designed so it can just be a beautiful space. All you have to do is pull the garage door off. It's fully insulated and ready to go. This is not a shed, this is actually a room.
Yeah, because often garages are built much cheaper because it's not insulated, it's not anything.
Yep, and you know, transport may become automated. We may get rid of all of our cars. So you need to have spaces like this that can have a different life. Everything's automated. You know what that means? That means we've been locked out.
I'm too old for this shit.